إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So in our classes, the ABC of Islamic knowledge, we have spoken a little bit about the etiquettes of wudu, making wudu at home, preparing yourself both physically and mentally for going to the masjid, and the great reward that the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned when it comes to someone setting out to the masjid. The only reason they leave their house is because they want that mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in that there is great reward. So today, inshallah, we'll speak a little bit about one particular issue. This is an issue that some people might never have heard of. Others might have heard of it but have never realized how important it is. This issue is in Arabic, the scholars, they call it Tahiyyatul Masjid, and it can be loosely translated to mean the two opening raka'at, unit of prayer, that the person prays once they enter the masjid. So as soon as you enter the masjid, before you do anything else, you, according to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you're advised to pray 2 rak'at. Now, before going into the fiqh aspect of it, speaking about what the scholars have said and what is mentioned in the hadith, I want to share with you a story, and this is an authentic story, not from the Prophet ﷺ, but from one of the scholars that lived many years, many centuries after the Prophet ﷺ. This scholar was known as Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri. This scholar reached very high levels in his studies. He became very well known until this day, and he passed away many hundred years ago. And he really excelled in his studies, in his Islamic studies. But what people don't know is his origin story. Right? Today they have these superheroes, right? These movies and Marvel this and that, and they speak about origin stories. This is a true origin story of this scholar, how he came to know about, how he started his path, his journey to seek knowledge. Often when we speak about scholars, we think that these people are special individuals who were born and set out on a path from birth to become great scholars. When in reality, if you look into their lives, they lived lives very similar to ours. Yes, it might have been that their parents put in a lot of effort, their parents struggled with them, spent all they had to make sure that they learned this knowledge. It is mentioned that Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, his mother used to go to great lengths to make sure that he learned that knowledge. Imam Malik, rahimahullah, his mother, when Imam Malik was still a young boy, she would dress him up in the clothes that the scholars would wear, a young boy. And she would encourage him and tell him, go to the masjid and sit with the big men. And perhaps some of that knowledge and their etiquettes and manners will rub off on you. So these are, the blessings of good parenthood, and it shows us how important it is to help our children, to set the example first and foremost. But the point here is that many other scholars they might have been not that serious about knowledge from a young age, and it was something that happened to them at a certain point in their life that changed their direction completely. And this is such a story. And the story goes that Ibn Hazm, as a young man, he didn't have much interest in knowledge. And he narrates this story himself in the books of history in Islam. He says, one day I happened to enter the masjid. Right? And when I entered the masjid, I didn't know better. Right? So I entered the masjid, and what was the first thing that I did? I sat down. I sat down on the floor. And people, they told me, they said, you can't sit down. Stand up and pray. Because there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when you enter the masjid, you should pray 2 rak'at before sitting down. So he said, I was confused. But I did as I was told. So I stood up, I prayed 2 rak'at, and I sat down. And then the next day, or after a little while, he said, I came back to the masjid. And what did I do this time? I did what I had been told. So I came into the masjid and I started praying 2 rak'at, tahiyyat al-masjid. And I heard people saying, what are you doing? This is not a time for prayer. You don't pray tahiyyat al-masjid after Asr. This was after Asr. So they told me, sit down, stop praying, sit down. And he said, I was so confused. I was upset. I was angry. One time people are telling me stand up to pray, another time they're telling me sit down, you should not be praying. So he said that ignited a spark. And I vowed from that day to find out the reason. Why are we supposed to pray at certain times and do certain things, and at other times we're not supposed to do these same things? So the story goes on, and he mentions how the next day he went to the house of one of the scholars, and when he knocked on the door, he was told that the scholar, the Imam, was not home. So he said, I'm going to sit here until the Imam comes back. So he sat and waited, and then once the Imam came back and he found out the story about this young man, he took the young man under his wing and he started teaching him the knowledge. And from there, Ibn Hazm later on became who he became. And not only did he become a scholar, but he became a great scholar in Islam. Right? So this issue of tahiyyat al-masjid, these 2 rak'at, it is sometimes a source of confusion for some people. So let us break it down in a simple way. First of all, there are the tahiyyat al-masjid, the scholars, they have agreed that the minimum is 2 units, 2 rak'at of prayer. However, some scholars have not put a maximum to it. So if you come to the masjid and you pray 2 units of tahiyyat al-masjid, you can actually pray more than 2 units. You can keep praying until there is a fard, some other prayer that needs to be prayed, like Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, and so on. So the minimum that they agree upon is 2 units, 2 rak'at. But there is no maximum. Another point that we need to make clear is the majority of the scholars, they say that these 2 units are sunnah, and some they say it is sunnah mu'akkada, meaning it is a strong and highly emphasized sunnah. Okay. This is important. Why? Because if we understand that, we understand that the one who sits down, he has not committed a sin. He's missed out on a great reward, definitely, but he has not committed a sin. So this is considered to be a sunnah mu'akkada by the majority of the scholars, and it is something that is emphasized. There is great virtue in it. And then after those points, the scholars in Islam, based on the different madahib, the madhabs, there is difference of opinion on this issue. And what is this difference of opinion? They agree in a general sense that praying 2 rakat is good. However, at the same time, there are certain periods where there are other ahadith that tell us that we should not be praying. Okay? The scholars in Islam, they refer to these as awqat al-nahi, times that it is prohibited for us to pray. Can anyone think of these times? Just as a sunset. In particular, when we say sunset, there are hadith that mention after Asr, and after Asr, when you get as closer you get to Maghrib, that nahi, that prohibition of praying, it increases. So it's even more disliked that a person just before the adhan of Maghrib and before the adhan of Maghrib, that they stand up and they pray. So this is a time that the scholars in Islam, they say you should not be praying from Asr up until Maghrib. And obviously the exception here is, one of the exceptions is, let's say you've missed praying Asr at its time. Then you don't say, well, I missed praying Asr at its time, so I don't have to pray Asr. No, you have to pray Asr. Even if it's just a few minutes before Maghrib, you have to make sure you pray Asr. Okay? So, sunset is one time, another time is Zawal, Jazakallah khairan, and Zawal is that time, the zenith, where the sun is straight above the person, and there is no shadow, and this usually happens before Dhuhr. Okay? And then we have the last time, after Fajr until the sun rises. These 3 times are times that have been established in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So this is important to understand because based on that we will understand the reason for the difference of opinion. Now, a group of scholars, they said that the prohibition overrides the Tahiyyatul Masjid. In simple terms, that if it's any of these 3 times, we do not pray. Well, if it's Tahiyyatul Masjid, doesn't matter, you don't pray. If it's Salatul Istikhara, you don't pray Salatul Istikhara. You don't pray any other prayer at that time, except for the prayer that you've missed, that you're making up. Okay? And this is Imam Abu Hanifa and the Hanafi madhab, they hold this opinion. Okay? So brothers who follow, sisters who follow the Hanafi madhab, they will not tend to pray at this time, whether it is Tahiyyatul Masjid or not. And sometimes when you enter masjids that follow this particular madhab, you will see the difference when it comes to praying at that time. And then there's the other group of scholars, and this is mainly in the Shafi'i madhab, Imam Shafi'i, and some of the other madhahib. They say that Tahiyyatul Masjid, it is a prayer that has a reason behind it. Okay? So as long as that reason is there, then that overrides the prohibition. So they're saying, in other words, that when the Prophet ﷺ is telling us not to pray, it means a prayer without a valid reason. Someone just sits after Fajr and they say, you know what, I want to pray some extra rakat, and they stand up. Say no. But if a person enters the masjid and they pray Tahiyyatul Masjid because they've entered the masjid, then according to this madhab, it is acceptable. And one point that is very important here is that amongst the majority of the scholars, in this issue, both opinions are valid. Okay? So the scholars in Islam, they say, the one who takes the opinion that we should not pray during times of nahi, then that person is correct in his opinion. And the one that says, no, we should pray Tahiyatul Masjid in this case, then that opinion is accepted. Okay? So this should not become a place where people start fighting or arguing. Okay? There is room for difference of opinion. If you tell a brother, pray Tahiyatul Masjid, and he says, no, in my madhab or to my understanding, you do not pray during the awqat al-nahi, then you leave it at that. And this is a point that we often fail to understand, that in Islam, especially in the fiqh, there might be, based on the different understandings of different texts, there's room for more than one opinion. And we have that beautiful example that many of you have heard of the story of the companions, that they were instructed by the Prophet ﷺ to pray at a certain place. He told them specifically, he said, do not pray Salatul Asr until you reach that place or that people. Right? Now, when they were traveling, it was almost time for Maghrib. And the companions, they split into two camps. And one group, they said, we have to pray. Why? Because Maghrib is almost here. If we wait any longer, then Asr will be gone. And when the Prophet ﷺ was telling us, do not pray Asr until you reach that place, but the Prophet ﷺ is trying to tell us here, or what his words mean actually, is hasten, be quick, reach that place. So you pray Asr over there. But the Prophet ﷺ does not want us to miss a prayer. And the other group, they say no. The Prophet ﷺ said what he said. He said, do not pray Asr until you reach that place. We're not going to understand it in a different way. So a group of them prayed, and another group, they said, we were going to wait until we reach that place. And once they did that, both groups came back to the Prophet ﷺ and they explained what had happened. And the Prophet ﷺ told them that both of them were correct in their actions. So this is an important concept to understand, that fiqh, and in Arabic fiqh means literally understanding. The Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ يُرِيدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, that whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for, He makes him comprehend and understand the religion. So fiqh, the meaning of fiqh is an understanding. And my understanding is going to be different from your understanding. So as long as there's room for difference of opinion, then that is valid in Islam. But there has to be that room. Right? Some people, they try to use difference of opinion when it's not valid. Right? Just the other day, yesterday, I believe we had a school that came to the masjid, and they asked one of the non-Muslim students, she said, Islam was revealed or began 1,400 years ago. A lot of things have changed since 1,400 years ago, and the world is different. How does Islam adapt to this century? And I told her, in the same way that I'm explaining now, that the religion, there are aspects of the religion that is dynamic, it adapts. We have the foundation in fiqh. If we go back to them, we can use these foundations to come to conclusions that people before never even thought of. Okay. The permissibility of praying when you're in the air, flying. Did anyone ask the Prophet ﷺ about that? No. And many new things that have come about with technology and so on, that the scholars can answer. Why? Because they have the qawaid, they have the foundations. However, there are also things that are set in stone in Islam, that there is no difference of opinion, regardless of whether it was 1,400 years ago, or if it is today, or if it's 1,000 years from now. One example is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us through the wahi, the revelation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. No one can come and say, well, you know what, it's been 1,400 years ago. Maybe Allah is two, وَعِيَادُ بِاللَّهِ, right? And this is one of the beautiful things that the great scholar, Sheikh Imam Al-Bani, rahimahullah, he was debating a man once. Right? And the man was trying to make it seem that there's a lot of difference of opinion, right? Which is true, but still there are things that we agree on. And the statement that he said was, he said, there is no verse, not one ayah in the entire Quran that Muslims agree on. There's a difference of opinion everywhere. Every single ayah you open the Quran, this person is saying something, this person is saying something else. And then Imam Al-Bani, he looked at him and he said to him, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Is there any ikhtilaf? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. So the point here is that yes, there is certain aspects of the religion that is dynamic and it adapts, and there's difference of opinion and room for that, and there's other things that are plain and simple, black and white. And those things are usually the aqidah. The aqidah stays the same from 1,000 years ago until now. Even if you look into the stories of the Prophets ﷺ, every messenger came with the same message. He didn't come with a different message. Ya qawmi ibudullah ma lakum min ilahin ghayruh. O my people, worship Allah. You do not have any other God, ilah, other than Him. Right? But what was different from time to time was the Sharia, how to implement the laws. For one group of people, the Sharia was slightly different, and for us, it is slightly different. Another point, and perhaps we will conclude on this point, is when it comes to Tahiyyat al-Masjid, the scholars in Islam, they've said it is permissible for you to join the Tahiyyat al-Masjid, these 2 rak'at, with the ratiba, the sunnah of the prayer. I'll give you an example. The adhan for Fajr has been given, right? And you enter the masjid after the adhan has been given. And we know before Fajr there is 2 rak'at of sunnah, right? Now, the scholars, they say what you can do is you can pray just 2 units of prayer, 2 rak'at, with the intention of it being both Tahiyyat al-Masjid and the Sunnah for Fajr. In other words, you do not have to come in, pray 2 rak'at, and then make the taslim, and then stand up for Sunnah of Fajr and pray 4 in total. So you can combine them. Okay. So this is another issue that the scholars mentioned. And this is a sunnah that we often forget. Right? And we should try to keep these sunnah alive. It is easy to come to the masjid and to sit down straight away. Just some other final points that I wish to mention here is some of the scholars, they say this sunnah, it should be prayed before sitting down. So some scholars, they say if a person sits down, then that sunnah has passed them. So if you sit down and then you remember, you do not have to stand up and pray the Tahiyyat al-Masjid. Once you've sat down, you've sat down. Okay. Another thing is, if you leave the masjid for a reason, a hajj, a need, and you know that you will be coming back. Okay, you go home or you go to the shop and then you come back. You do not have to pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid again. Okay. Okay? It is just the initial time. But if you leave the masjid and you don't know whether you will be back or when you will be back, once you do come back, then you should pray Tahiyatul Masjid again. And also when it comes to Friday prayers, the scholars in Islam, they've said you should pray Tahiyatul Masjid when you enter the masjid, even if the Imam is giving the khutbah. Even if the Imam is giving the khutbah, and obviously the way that you do it then is you make it very short and simple, and you do not cause a scene and distract people from the khutbah that is being given. And the sunnah is to pray those 2 rak'at even if you come late, and then you sit down. So inshallah with that, we will conclude today's class. We will open up for some questions. For the sisters upstairs, if they have any questions, they can text their questions to the number 250-896-1388. Again, that's 250-896-1388. And if you have any questions here, now is the time to ask. Yes.
I just remember one thing that I visited my country back home.
Yes.
A few years ago. So when there was a khutbah, the Friday, I was praying 2 rakat in the masjid. And a brother was pulling my pants from behind. I couldn't realize. So when I finished my salah, I looked back and asked him, why did you do that? He said, look at the light. And I looked at the light. There's a red light and there's a blue light and a green light. So the red light was on, means don't pray now, because the Imam is giving a khutbah.
Yes.
So I said, wow, red light now in the masjid.
Yes, yes. No, Jazakallah khairan. So the brother is speaking of his experience and how some people told him not to pray at that particular time. But again, it comes back to that difference of opinion. You know, some people they hold the opinion that you should not pray while the Imam is giving the khutbah, or to pray during those prohibited times. And we say that is a valid opinion. However, if a person does pray, then they have certainly not done anything wrong. It is correct. And by praying, you get more reward because it's a prayer that someone else has not prayed. And Allah knows best.
But there's a clear hadith about that.
Yes.
About 2 rakat when even the Imam is giving khutbah, right?
Yes.
So when there's a clear hadith, you shouldn't follow any other opinion, right? You should follow hadith.
Yes, no, Jazakallah khairan. If there's a clear hadith, then we always follow the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, at the same time, the clear hadith, it needs to be understood in its proper way. I'll give you an example. This hadith that speaks about the Tahiyatul Masjid, it says that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا دَخَلَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَسْجِدِ فَلَا يَجْلِسْ حَتَّى يُصَلِّيَ رَكْعَتَيْنِ. Okay. Now, the way that the word is, the hadith is phrased, it sounds as if it's a command, an amr, that the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, فَلَا يَجْلِسْ, let him not sit until he prays rak'atayn, meaning this Tahiyatul Masjid. However, in this case, the scholars, they say this is a sunnah mu'akkada. If you understand the hadith on the face value, then you say, how is it a sunnah? The Prophet ﷺ is telling us directly. So the point here is that yes, the hadith always precede what anyone else has said, but it needs to be understood by the ai''imma, the imams of the madhabs and the scholars in Islam. But in this case, with the salah for during the khutbah, you're right, it is better to pray than to sit down. Yes?
If somebody starts sunnah and pray start, I have to leave.
Jazakallah khairan. This is a good question. Let's say a person prays sunnah, whether it is Tahiyatul Masjid or if it's any other sunnah. and the Iqamah is given and people start praying. There are hadith here that tell us that there is no salah once the Iqamah has been given. Once the Iqamah has been given, doesn't matter what you're doing, you have to stop what you're doing and join the salah. This is important because some brothers and sisters, they might not know this hadith, and especially in Fajr, what happens is that the Imam might be leading the salah, Fajr salah, and they come to the masjid, and instead of joining the prayer, they think, let me not miss the sunnah of Fajr, so they will stand by themselves and pray 2 rak'ah while the people are praying their salah. And then once they finish the 2 rak'ah, they come and join. And this is not the way that the sunnah teaches us. If you happen to be in a salah, then you should stop that sunnah salah and you join the people who are praying. The only exception that I know of is that if the amount that you have left of your salah is short, less than a rak'ah, then you can finish that salah and join. But if you have more than that, then you should make the taslim. Some scholars say, others they say you do not have to make any taslim as long as you leave the salah with your niyyah, that is sufficient, and you come and join the other people who are praying. So I hope that makes sense. Let me just take some questions here. One question is about the zakah on jewelry. It is a little bit off topic, so we will delay that until another time. Another question is, I was on a plane and I prayed sitting. Am I allowed to pray sitting if I'm not allowed standing? So, inshallah, we'll deal with it more in detail later, but just to explain it now very briefly, it is when you pray on a plane, one of the pillars of the salah is that you stand up. But the scholars, they mention specifically, they say, qiyam al-qudra, that you should be standing up as long as you're able to do so. So it excludes people who physically are incapable of standing up, right? Maybe a person is paralyzed or something, sick even, and they cannot stand up, then they can pray sitting. If the prayer is fard, dhuhr, asr, maghrib, isha, fajr, and so on, then you have to pray standing as long as you're able. But if it's a sunnah, you have a choice. You can pray standing and sitting. Now in this case, with praying on a plane, what you need to do is, if it's a fard, you need to ask, can I pray? Is there any room for me to pray? And most likely, in most planes, they will tell you no. So then you look at the time. Is this a prayer that you can combine and delay because you're praying and then you pray standing up once you reach your destination? If that is a possibility, then you should do so. If not, then if all other fails and they tell you, no, you cannot stand up and this is a prayer that you cannot delay and combine, then you have to pray sitting. But this is not the ideal way, and Allah knows best. One final question here from the sisters. If I make wudu during Fajr and I put on my socks, how long is my wudu valid? There's difference of opinion. Some scholars, they say if you put on socks when you have, whilst making wudu, when you take those socks off, it nullifies your wudu. But this is a weak opinion. The stronger opinion is your wudu still remains until you break your wudu by passing wind or using the washroom or any other of the things that breaks one's wudu. So I hope that makes sense. Yes?
But how far away from home do you have to be so that it counts as being traveling?
Good question. So how far away do you have to be in order for you to be considered to be a traveler? If you look in the madhabs, there's very specific mileage distance. Usually it is 83 kilometers or so. This is a valid opinion. But scholars, to make it easy for people, they say this goes back to the culture and the customs of people, wherever you live. So if in the language that people are, or the customs that people have, if you consider something to be a travel, then you're a traveler. So, for example, if you go to Sydney, right? Would you say here that I'm traveling, I'm setting out on a journey to Sydney? Most likely not. Right? Sydney is just here. What is it? Half an hour or so. Drive up and then you come back. You don't consider yourself to be a traveler. But if you go to Vancouver, Vancouver is a trip, right? You might stay there for some time, and it is even that is beyond the 83 kilometers and the distance that has been mentioned. So a simple guideline, not to confuse people, is to go by the numbers that have been set by scholars, 83 kilometers if I remember correctly. Anything that is beyond that, it is considered to be traveling, and you can shorten your prayers and you can combine your prayers. And anything less than that, you're not considered to be a traveler, and Allah knows best. Yes.
Regarding the Haytham,
Yes.
say I walked in the mosque and then I saw my friend shake hand. I told him I saw some harm to remove it, and then I started to pray.
Yes.
So what I should do in this case? Should I stay to pray the masjid, the Haytham, and then start to chat with my friends, or it doesn't matter? I can chat with my friends, remove the harm, and then I can.
So one of the questions is, if a person comes into the masjid to pray Tahiyatul, and they want to pray Tahiyatul Masjid, but they see their friends, they want to chat, and they might want to remove some harm in the masjid or do something before praying. Should they pray first or do those things first? We say there is no time limit on Tahiyatul Masjid. The only condition is sitting down. So once you sit down, then Tahiyatul Masjid is no longer an option. But if you keep standing the whole time, then you can still pray Tahiyatul Masjid. You can speak to the people, you can do the things that you want to do, standing up, and then once you finish that, you pray Tahiyatul Masjid. But I would advise that you try to hasten towards praying Tahiyatul Masjid, just for the sake of rushing towards good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about good in the Quran, He speaks about rushing towards good. Fastabiqul khairat, it becomes a musabaqa, a race. So you should not delay that good. So if it's an option, you pray first, and then you have the discussions and you do other things afterwards. And Allah knows best. Yes.
About the adhan, when we start and into the so I have to wait till when we finish to do.
Jazakallah khairan. So if you enter the masjid and the adhan is going off, should you wait until the adhan is finished or not? The best option is that you wait until the adhan is finished, and once the adhan is finished, you pray what you need to pray. Only because listening to the adhan and repeating after the muaddin, there is a great reward in that. So you should not pray during the time that the adhan is being given. You stop what you're doing, even if you're reading Quran or making dua. You stop, you listen to the adhan, you repeat after the muaddin, and you make the dua at the end. And Allah knows best. Yes.
If I'm away for like 7 days, and I'm at my destination for 7 days, and it's more than 83 kilometers, however long it has to be, how long would I have to be at that destination to be able to pray the full 4 rak'ah?
Yes, that's a good question. So you're traveling, and you're traveling more than 83 kilometers. The scholars in Islam, they say there's 2 scenarios. One is you can join the prayers and you're considered to be a traveler for 14 days, right? However, if you do not know when you will be coming back, and you think to yourself that it can happen anytime, even if you stayed in that place for 6 months and you did not know when you will be traveling back, then you're still considered to be a traveler. But for most of us, we know our schedules ahead of time. So if we're going to be at a location for more than 14 days, we can join in shorter prayers for 2 weeks, a fortnight, and then after that we have to pray the full amount, and Allah knows best. Yes?
Chef, what is considered sitting? If you're sitting on a chair, does it mean you're sitting on you're sitting on the floor?
It's a good question. It might sound a little bit funny, but it is a good question. What is considered to be sitting? If you sit on a chair, is that considered to be sitting, or if you sit on the floor? And this, I've heard scholars answer this question, and they say very simply, once your behind touches a surface, then that is considered to be sitting. Whether it is on a chair like this, or if it's on the floor, then that is considered to be sitting. So if you crouch down, but you don't let your behind touch the floor, as long as you're crouching, then you have not sat down. Some questions from the sisters. There's a lot of questions about wiping over socks. Inshallah, we'll deal with those in the future. If I travel between Vancouver and Victoria and vice versa, sometimes every once a week, what do I do with my salah? If a person travels, as long as they're considered to be traveling, then they are allowed to use the special rules for a traveler. Even if that traveling is happening on a daily basis. Let's say a person's profession is a pilot, right, and they travel every single day. The scholars in Islam, they say, as long as the person fulfills the conditions of being a traveler, then they can combine and they can delay their fast as well. So, inshallah, with that we will conclude. And we will carry on next week. These classes are every Wednesday at 6 o'clock up until 6:30, and then we'll give some time for questions and answers. So, jazakumullahu khairan, wa barakallahu feekum, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.